We now continue Lecture 1 with Part C of this presentation on science in the ancient world. And you'll notice that this map of ancient Egypt shows the key cities that dot the Nile as it moves towards the Mediterranean. And I want you to focus on the Delta region, and especially on the far left of the delta, you'll see the town or the city of Alexandria, Egypt, named after and by Alexander the Great. In fact, that is where Alexander the Great is supposed to have been buried, in a glass casket so that people could look down upon him and wonder at his greatness. Conquered most of the world before he was 33 or so. In any case, Alexandria in the first century was a place of great learning, and that drew to it some of the greatest scientists of its day. And we're going to be talking about one of them today, and that is Ptolemy, who was the great astronomer of the ancient world. Actually, he builds a lot on Plato and Aristotle. But we'll look at his life and see his input on science in his day. There is a picture of Claudius Ptolemaeus, or as we call him today, Ptolemy. He lived from circa 90 to 168 CE. So he is in the Christian era, born just about the time that John was beginning to write or writing his Revelation, maybe a little before that time. So he is a scientist and an astronomer, in many ways the epitome of Alexandrian science. Alexandria was famous for many things intellectual. It had a great library, boasting to have works of almost every great culture of the world. It had a fascinating city that was built architecturally on the model of ancient Greece, and the buildings would all look like Greek buildings. The streets laid out on a Greek city plan. It had one of the great wonders of the ancient world, the seven wonders of the ancient world, and that was the great lighthouse of Pharos, which was built and was able to cast a beam of light a mile into the Mediterranean at night. This is, of course, without electricity. They did that using lenses and mirrors and very hot, bright burning substances. We're not exactly sure how they carried it out, but it was truly, seemingly miraculous, and I'm sure a great boon for mariners at night. Alexandria was a wonderland. It was a wonderful place to work, and that's probably what drew Ptolemaeus there. He was three things in his life, probably more than that, but in terms of our course, he was the great astronomer of the ancient world. He was a mathematician and a geographer, and made breakthroughs in all three, but especially in astronomy and geography. His greatest work, the Almagest, is made up of 13 separate books, and it has to do with charting the night sky. He, in that work, not only has star charts and makes measurements and speculates about the nature of the solar system, as we would call it today, he follows what was currently believed at the time, and that is that the Earth or the universe is geocentric. It is centered on the Earth. The universe goes around the Earth, which stands still, and he gets this, of course, probably directly from Aristotle, but also from Plato before him. He believed, like those two, that the planets fly in concentric circles around the Earth. He imagined that that was because the planets are embedded in crystalline spheres. And think of the Earth as a hard ball, And around that there is a softball, and the softball is made of glass. Embedded in that softball is a round piece of matter, which we call the moon. And as you look up from the Earth's surface, you cannot see the crystalline sphere, but you can see the moon moving as it goes. And then beyond it are the other planets, all of which move in these perfectly circular orbits, kept that way because of the crystalline spheres that they're working in. And then beyond the concentric spheres, there is the realm of the fixed stars. And he did a lot of work with star charts, and of course the ancients were very big on looking at the night sky. When you don't have cable TV and there's nothing to do, the night sky becomes your entertainment, and they were fascinated with it, and they of course made names for the various constellations and had mythology written about them. These people are also deeply into astrology, thinking that there is a predictive element to when you were born, under which stars, etc. He named 48 constellations, which become very, very useful to later astronomers as they go forward. And they could use Ptolemy's descriptions to note how the constellations had slightly changed over the short time between Ptolemy and their writings. So he was a key figure. Now, Ptolemy was very much aware of what was called retrograde motion when looking at a planet, like, for example, Mars. When you look at Mars from the Earth's surface, it doesn't always fly in a straight line. It seems to double back on itself and then continue. And he explained this with a model like that shown on your screen. And that is that there is a circular orbit to the planet Mars, and that's called the deferent. But within the deferent, the planet has an epicycle, and it moves in its own little circle within the orbit. And that causes from the Earth's surface to see the planet seemingly moving back and then again forward, kind of in an S shape as it goes around, it goes through the night sky. We would expect if the planet were embedded in a sphere that it would fly straight, but it doesn't, and this is Ptolemy's explanation. Now we're going to see that Copernicus in 1543 publishes a work in which he is going to explain that that is not at all accurate, and he is going to update, you might say, Ptolemy. But Ptolemy deserves to be highly credited for his work in terms of observing the night sky. In terms of geography, he, of course, once again, imagined a spherical Earth, completely round, and he is the first one, as far as we know, to project that sphere onto a flat surface and to make a map of the world. Now, it's not at all as accurate as modern maps, but and it's without the knowledge of major parts of the Earth. Nevertheless, Ptolemy was wonderfully intuitive and creative in his ideas regarding geography. Now, I wanted to introduce you to one of the great skeptics of the ancient world, and his name is Lucretius. And you're going to be reading this week a supplemental reading from Lucretius, which I think you'll find very interesting. Lucretius lived from 99 to 55 BCE. He was a skeptic, a philosopher, very, very good at writing, very clear. And I'll bet that you're wondering, having gone through what we've discussed today, and as you go through the reading, you'll get more of it, that were there any people at this time who had serious doubts about what was being laid down as, for example, religious truth regarding the nature of human beings. And Lucretius is one of the great skeptics when it comes to Christian and Jewish theories of the afterlife. So I wanted to give you an early example of a scientist, in this case a philosopher who dabbles in science, of the ancient world, who has serious doubts about modern, in his day, modern religious beliefs. And this can be seen as a foretaste of what's going to happen later in our day when scientists, many of them, turn against the idea that there is any sort of a life beyond this life that we're living. In any case, Lucretius is very much influenced by Epicurean atomism, which comes from Democritus. Epicurus was an ancient philosopher who picked up on Democritus. Remember, Democritus is the one who said that the earth is really made up of living things which are the result of random accumulations of atoms as they fall towards the earth. And these atoms form into different substances, and in that process, human life is formed. And that human life, according to the Epicureans, is only there when the atoms are in full connection with one another. When a person dies, those atoms disintegrate and go back into the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But the Epicureans felt there is no resurrection. There is no life after the human life that we have. And therefore Epicurus said, we must live in terms of bringing the most happiness into our lives and to the lives of those we live with. And so he is a very great early liberal. The Epicureans who followed him were as well. You might know the word Epicurean has today the connotation of eating the most flavorful, wonderful foods. And it was thought that Epicureans had these wonderful feasts in which they would eat, and then, according to some, who would regurgitate their food and then eat again to have the enjoyment of eating more than once. I'm not sure that's true, but in any case, Democritus is the source of that thinking, and Lucretius picks up on both Democritus and the Epicureans in his essay. You'll find he talks about this life as being short and not having an afterlife to follow it. His work is taken from On the Nature of Things, and it's a very, very eloquent statement of, you might say, extreme liberalism in the ancient world. I think you'll enjoy reading it. I had originally planned to have this this document as a basis for our first forum, but I think it's better to devote that forum to getting to know each other. And we may come back to to Lucretius later and talk about his ideas as we get into the modern period. So that wraps up our lecture number 1. I'm sorry it was so long. They won't be so long in the future. But you now have an idea, at least, of some of the major movements in the ancient world.